IB Nation, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Wednesday. That means it is midweek rundown time. And this is sort of the first in-season rundown that we're going to do. Just a reminder, today, they're on the rundown. We are in-season rundowns. We're not doing a mailbag. I will answer any super chats if you guys have them, so I'll get those guys up. But we're going to talk Notre Dame Navy a little bit today, or actually a lot today. And then we're also talk some recruiting. We did something a couple weeks ago where I went through and gave the bellwether recruits for Notre Dame in the 2025 class on offense. Today, we're going to talk a little bit of defense and what's sort of to prove for the Notre Dame staff here in 2025 as they look to show that this staff can really take it to that next level. We'll dive into that. The two team aspects we're going to do. Yesterday, we dove a little bit into Navy, who Navy is, what to expect from the Middies this year. Today, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the matchups of this game. We'll do we kind of did that stacking up show last year. It's going to be a more condensed version of that. I'm going to briefly go over two of the areas we discuss, offense and defense, and then I'm going to dive into the matchups that I think are most intriguing, or at least it'll vary week to week. Sometimes it's most intriguing. Sometimes it might be the most important part of the matchup. Today, it's going to be more about the importance of it. And then I'm going to dive into guys that need to step up in this game. And this is going to be a feature that I do relatively frequently of players that I think really need to perform well to give Notre Dame their best chance of winning each week. And so we'll dive into that today on each side of the ball. And then we'll do the recruiting part. So it's going to be a fun couple days, man. I'm really excited about this season. I think you guys have picked up on that a little bit already. But I'm just kind of I don't know where you guys are, but I'm just looking forward to finding out who this team is. We've talked all off season. We all have our hopes and our thoughts and our wishes of what we hope this team will be, what this team could be. But then there's also that great uncertainty because of all the unknowns. And so this and to make this Navy game more intriguing is there's even more unknowns when you take Navy into the conversation, because they have a new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, different coaches that they've got to build around. So we're going to dive into that as well, and we've dove into that actually already. First part of today's show, we're going to talk about sort of stacking up. How does Notre Dame stack up against Navy? What are the areas where Notre Dame should thrive? What are the areas that are a little bit tougher matchups that Notre Dame's going to have to really perform well in order to thrive in those matchups, to dominate those matchups in order to win the game? And we'll go on both sides of the ball. And I want to begin with the offense. And I'm going to get some visuals for you all today, so you don't have to just look at me today. Give you guys something else to look at, something more pleasing to look at. And we're going to dive into how the Notre Dame offense stacks up against the Navy defense. And just kind of overall, you get a sense of the numbers here. That is the pass offense. Look, this is an area where, these numbers are a bit misleading, I think, or at least they will be. They're not misleading now because this is who Notre Dame was last year. Notre Dame was not a team that was incredibly productive from a volume standpoint throwing the football, obviously ranked 98th last year in passing yards. But they were a top 40 team in most other categories, big plays, efficiency, sacks allowed. But they were kind of like right at that 40 mark last season. And then, of course, you have to look at that was with Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine. You got to think about how Notre Dame last year beat Clemson by 21 points while passing for, I think it was 85 yards in that game. It's going to be a little bit different this year with Sam Hartman at quarterback. Obviously, I don't believe that Sam Hartman's going to throw for the kind of yards he did the last couple seasons. He was basically averaging over 300 yards a game. Last 2 years, he was at 308.4 last year. He was at 302 the year before that. And I just expect a lot more production from him this season. The interesting thing is his least productive season of the last 3 years was the COVID year, and he averaged 247.1 yards per game that year. And that's about 40 yards more than what Notre Dame averaged last year. And he's been about 60 over the last 2 years. Now, do I expect that? No, I don't. But what I do expect in this game against a Navy defense that, as you can see, is really not good. And, context always matters, right? And when you look at the Notre Dame offense, you say, well, that yards per game number, that's pretty low. That's the same place that Navy's defense was when it comes to the pass game. Well, when you look at Notre Dame's pass game last year, obviously it was not very good. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you that, it was actually better than the numbers show. No, it was a very average pass offense. But they did go 17 of 21 for 269 yards and 4 touchdowns against Navy. The Navy game was Notre Dame's highest passer efficiency rating last year. The other part of the context that matters is Navy's. And when you look at that 250.2, they ranked 98th in the country. And you look at the other numbers, like, man, they ranked lower in yards. Why would that be when you consider how good they were at stopping the run? They ranked near the bottom in yards per attempt allowed, yards per completion allowed, touchdowns allowed, big plays allowed, pass efficiency defense allowed. Here's basically what it comes down to. They played 2 option teams last year. Navy did. They played Army and they played Air Force. And in those 2 games, when you look at the numbers, they gave up a grand total of 184 yards in those 2 games. Air Force threw 156 on 6 of 8 passing. Army went 2 for 12 for 28 yards, 2.3 yards per attempt. So when you consider that Army only averaged 2.3 yards per attempt and only passed for 28 yards, that tells you a little something. And if you take out the 2 option teams from Navy statistics here, they ranked 124th in passing defense last year. Simply put, I don't think that they should be that much better this year. Now, they were good at sacks. They were good at getting pressures on quarterbacks last year. But this is a matchup that Notre Dame has to thrive, right? And so what makes this part of the matchup intriguing is this is Notre Dame's sort of first opportunity to show off their new look wide receiver core. And you could say, well, they're going to need some time to get ready. They can't take that. They can't afford that. They're going to have to come out and perform well. I'm not saying they needed to dominate this matchup, but they have to perform well. This cannot be a game that Notre Dame receivers struggle to get open or drop passes or struggle to do their job. They just can't afford that. They have to come out and play well. They don't need to be mid-season form, but they have to play well. It's a very, very important part of it. Now, that's the concern, right? But the good news is you're not asking a bunch of dudes who've never played against Navy before to shine. Jaden Thomas played in this game last year, had 3 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. Deion Colesy had 2 catches for 50 yards against them last year. There are guys that have played. Chris Tyree had a touchdown catch against them last year. So there are guys that have played against Navy. This won't be a surprise to them, and I think they'll do fine. But it's going to be a chance to see that. Just to see that matchup. This is the overall scoring matchup. As you can see, it's another advantage for Notre Dame. I do have this article out already. The defensive one will be up later tonight. But as you can see, Notre Dame wins most of those matchups pretty convincingly for Notre Dame in that regard. So this is an area where Notre Dame should thrive when it just comes to the situational football, third down, red zone. Notre Dame had an average red zone offense last year, but they were good at getting touchdowns when they actually got into the red zone. And Navy last year was 10th nationally in red zone defense, but Notre Dame scored touchdowns on the 2 red zone trips that they had against Navy, scored touchdowns on both of them. So obviously Notre Dame was able to win that matchup last season. So here's the matchup for me when you talk about stacking up that's going to have the biggest impact on this game. It's the Notre Dame run offense against the Navy run defense. And we talked a lot about this yesterday, so I don't need to rehash how good we think Navy's defense was last year at stopping the run. This is not a false number. This is not an inflated number because of whatever the case may be. As I pointed out yesterday, there was only one non-option team that rushed for over 105 yards against Navy last year, and that was Houston. Notre Dame only ran for 66 yards on 34 carries last season. It was one of their worst performances of the season. And they're going to have to be better. I mean, it's as simple as that. They're going to have to be better. Notre Dame returns 3 starting offensive linemen. Navy returns all 3 of their starting defensive linemen and 6 of their 7 front 7 players this season. So the reason that matters to me is because it makes this matchup very intriguing. And last year, for example, Notre Dame's offensive line needed really 2.5, 3 games to get rolling. It was understandable. You were making a complete philosophical change from an offensive line coaching standpoint. You had to build a brand new foundation with Coach Easton moving on from the Jeff Quinn era. Coach Easton laid that foundation. You would hope that the line could get going faster this year. There are 2 new starters at both guard spots. So all 3 returning starters, are going to be impacted by the fact that there's a new starter by them. If those new starters don't perform well. Obviously, Pat Coogan at left guard. You've got Rocco Spindler at right guard. So we're going to find out real quickly the kind of job that Joe Rudolph has been able to do for Notre Dame this offseason. And so when I look at this matchup and I say, hey, what kind of offense is Notre Dame really going to be this season? I think this is going to be the first big test for Notre Dame. This is going to be their first test to look at and say, hey, you know, are you that team, right? You've got a loaded backfield. You've got one of the best tackle tandems of college football. If Zeke Correll plays, the reality is the expectation should be that Notre Dame should run the football better than Navy against Navy than they did last year. If they simply repeat what we saw last season, it's going to be a concerning sign. It's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination, because again, we saw this last year. They didn't run the ball very well against Navy last year, and then the next week against Boston College, they ran for 281 yards. But then the next week they were 90 against USC, and then the next game they were 265. It was that inconsistency that was problematic, and you want to avoid that, because if Notre Dame goes out there, let's say in week 1 against Tennessee State, and they rush for 325 yards against Tennessee State, that doesn't tell us that they're a better running offense than they were a year ago, or they're even as good as they were a year ago, because that's kind of what you expect from them. It's not going to be till week 3 when they play NC State that you're going to be able to look at this rush defense and say, or rush offense and say, hey, they got better, and there are going to be that kind of team if they don't perform well against Navy. On the flip side, so I took the negative angle first. On the flip side, if Notre Dame comes out and can establish a ground attack against Navy, and what do I mean by established ground attack? I don't need them to run for 280 yards. If they do, great. That's wonderful. But I don't need them to. I just need to be much better than they were last year. They need to be able to establish some level of balance. There are going to be negatives in this game. There are going to be tackles for loss. There are going to be stuffs. There are going to be plays where you're just looking, boy, Navy's just shutting the run game down. What they need to do a better job this year is to find create the ability to gash Navy. And there are several ways I think they can go about that this season. I think one of the issues that Notre Dame had last season is, again, they were very you knew what they were going to do running the football for the most part, and they just were going to line up and do it. And when you look at Notre Dame, and they were coming off of a game the week before against Clemson where they ran for 263 yards, and they just basically ran duo almost all game. Well, if you do that against Clemson, you're going to think you can do that against Navy. And they mixed it up a little bit, but not to the degree where I felt it really presented Navy with some problems. So what we're going to see from the run game this year is, not only does the offensive line need to be able to get a push against Navy, need to be able to move Navy off the ball. I think that's an important thing you're going to have to try to establish in this game. Navy does a good job of using two things to their advantage. The reality is Navy knows we're smaller than most teams we play. We're definitely going to be smaller than Notre Dame. And so we're not going to be able to just line up and play big boy football against them. As we've talked about, Navy's starting left end is 6'4", 256, Jacob Busek. He's their best defensive lineman. Their nose guard, Donald Bernard, is 256 pounds. His backup's only 278. Defensive tackle Clay Cromwell's 292. His backup is 250. And then the Raider linebacker, Jordan Sanders, which sometimes is off the ball, sometimes is on the ball. He's 6'5", 227. His backup is 6'4", 210. Their starting inside linebackers, one of them is 6'1", 230. The other one is 5'11", 215. And then their two outside linebackers, when you look at the Raider, as I said, 6'5", 227. But then the other, the striker, is 5'11", 207. Not a lot of size. So Navy knows that. Coach Newberry knows that. And he did a really good job last year of playing to that. So what do? You're going to see they use quickness off the ball. They're going to try to beat you off the ball, because if I'm going against you man to man, and you've got me by 30, 40, 50 pounds, and I try to go head up with you, I'm going to lose that battle more often than not. But I can do two things to help minimize that part of the advantage you have over me. Number one is I can beat you off the ball quickness-wise to one of your sides, which is in a gap. Because if I'm coming at you as an offensive lineman and I can come at you square and I get my hands on you, you're done. But if you can get past me and then I have to turn my hips to go block you, I've lost my power profile. And now I can't move you vertically. I have to just kind of ride you laterally. The other thing that they do a good job of is getting low, then using their lack of great size and height. I mean, their D line is 6'4" on the edge, but it's 6 foot, 6 foot, 6'3", 6'1" on the inside. And so they do a really nice job of getting low and getting underneath and quick and into gaps. And essentially what happens is your offensive line is just kind of stuck right there at the line of scrimmage and they don't move. And that's an advantage to Navy. Anytime you can get an offensive line to just kind of stand up and show, then you're gonna be in trouble as an offense. And so Notre Dame's gonna have to find ways to get a push. They're gonna have to be able to do that when running at Navy. You have to be good enough to occasionally line up and just say, "Hey, look, we're just gonna come at you and we're gonna hammer you." But I think the other part, or I gotta stop saying that. I've been saying that a lot lately. The I think part. The other part of this is being able to create different running lanes and creating different types of gaps and messing with that Navy eye discipline a little bit. Last year, Navy was able to pin their ears back and crash Notre Dame because Notre Dame was just going to basically be an in the box team. And what Navy was doing is they were crashing their linebackers hard, and then they were bringing their safeties right behind them, and sort of the run fits. And so this season, Notre Dame needs to be able to run between the tackles, but there's also some things they need to be able to do to create advantage, take advantage of how aggressive downhill Navy was against them. Misdirections are going to be important, but it can't just be misdirections into a crowded box. Creating some misdirections that get outside. Doing things. What I would like to see them do is some things with Chris Tyree, where maybe you can get some quick perimeter cracks outside and run a jet sweep to him, or maybe run a reverse action off of some of your runs, because as aggressive as Navy is, if I'm running a stretched play to the right, the way that they were last year, but I tell you what, if you can get Chris Tyree on some kind of reverse action and you just need to make one block and he's going to have a big play. The next time you're running that stretch play with that Chris Tyree, that reverse action, this time it's just a smoke, that they're gonna be thinking twice about that. Getting some jet sweeps. Those are things that they can do. Maybe some buck sweep type action, maybe some toss type action, some things where you can take advantage of sealing inside all of those numbers and trying to get out to the perimeter. Now, that's going to require your receivers are going to have to block well in this game. And there's a time and a place where the receivers have to block well. I think the final piece of this matchup that could give Notre Dame an advantage is going to be the pass game. Notre Dame has to be able to go out in the pass game and make Navy pay. And not just make Navy pay with just dropbacks. It's also about making Navy pay with the run game and the run looks, because if you're able to hit some big plays in the RPO game, and part of that's the screens and the quicks and things like that, but also hitting the glance route, some of the downfield stuff, taking some shots, out of your run looks and out of your run action, then guess what? Navy's going to have to make a tough decision. Do we back off a little bit and do more things where we keep our safeties back? Because if the safeties have to stay back, then they can't protect the linebackers, which means if they're going to still bring their aggressive run pressures, if you can crease the line in some way somehow, then you've got some big play opportunities in the run game, and it leaves them vulnerable to different running back options. Now, we saw Notre Dame do that early last year, where they hit Aldrich Estime on a little arrow route, and he catches it and just runs it for a 30-yard touchdown like it was nothing. We need to see Notre Dame be willing to go back to that. There was other times where you had Estime or Diggs open outside on a little swing route, and if you throw it to him, it's 15, 20 yards as much as get as much as you can. And it would have made Navy think twice about it. And they just didn't take advantage of those opportunities. So it's going to be very important that Notre Dame use their screen game, that they use their quick game, they use their misdirection game and their play action downfield pass game as well to take some of the pressure off of the run game. But at the end of the day, the run game still has to be able to create its own yards. They still have to be able to run the football against Navy. I don't care about getting to 190, 220, 230. That doesn't matter. It's just about show me the ability to line up and create creases, be well designed, well schemed, play hard, get some movement, and make them pay when they try to come at you. Because you can't just beat a team with the blitz every time throwing the football. You've got to be able to find ways to beat their blitz when you're running the football as well. And last year, Notre Dame couldn't do that on the offensive side of the ball. And if they're going to want to win this game, that's going to be an area they're going to have some success. Sorry about that. Let's go to the other side of the ball. And let's talk about the matchup between the Notre Dame defense and the Navy offense. And obviously, look, one of these matchups, let's just get it out of the way right now. Let's just go to the past matchup here between those two. This is it right here. I mean, the guys, we all know this. Navy doesn't throw the ball a whole lot. Even with the new looks that we talked about yesterday, they're still not going to throw the ball a lot. The most passes they threw in average per game average they had at Kennesaw State the last several years under Brian Chestnut was 17.6. They're still not throwing the ball a ton, but this is a very underrated but still important part of the game, because what you cannot let Navy do is get the big cheap yards, and we saw that from them last year. They only completed what I think like 2 passes in that game last year, maybe only 1. Actually, let me pull it up real quick. But that one pass that they did complete, now they completed 6 last year for 108 yards. I mean, that can't happen. And I remember one of them being a big play where Cam Hart got sucked in and got beat over the top. You can't allow those type of plays. And if they do happen, it's got to be in garbage time. But Notre Dame's going to have to be able to limit the big throws down the field. If they hit a couple hitches on you and tackle them, 4, 5, 6 yard gain, I can live with that for a couple plays. But you can't allow them to hit those big over routes. You can't allow them to hit the wheel routes. You can't allow them to hit the goes and the posts and the different things that they'd like to do throwing the football where they take their big shots and steal yards. You're going to have to shut that down. And one of the ways where Notre Dame has been able to have success with that in the past is getting to the quarterback. And that's going to be a big test, is when Navy does throw the football, is can you get to the quarterback? That's going to be an important part of this matchup. When you look at the scoring units, obviously Navy last year struggled mightily scoring last season. Now, they didn't have a ton of problems scoring against Notre Dame in the second half, but that was also partly out of opportunity. I mean Notre Dame's offense, this is wild. I gotta read you guys this stat. We're doing a mailbag on the message board where I'm just answering a bunch of questions for the next couple of days. It's something we're going to do each week. But Notre Dame in the second half against Navy last year went 3 plays, minus 6 yards. Next series, 3 plays, interception that gave Navy the ball at the 23-yard line. They scored the next play. The next series was 6 plays, minus 1 yards. The next series, 3 plays, 8 yards. The next series, 3 plays, 1 yard. And then that was basically it. So in the second half, Notre Dame had 5 possessions. They went 3 and out on all but 1. And the only series they didn't go 3 and out, they gained minus 1 yards. So Navy had a lot of possessions last year against Notre Dame in the second half, which is partly why Notre Dame did give up more yards. I mean, sometimes Navy won't have 6 possessions in an entire game. And Navy had 1 touchdown drive last year. It was in the second half, long touchdown drive. And that was late in the game when they scored to get within 3 points. It was 35-24. Notre Dame was kind of in control of the game. Even then, Navy scored late, and Notre Dame got the ball back with 1:21 and was able to run out the clock in 2 plays. But when you look at that, even though the game wasn't necessarily as close as you would like it to be, the fact is Navy scored a field goal. Then they had 3 punts in the second half. Notre Dame forced 3 punts in the second half. Now, the Notre Dame defense had their fair share of problems in that game. Don't get me wrong. You can't allow the big pass play that I talked about. You can't allow that fullback dive to go for 40 yards like we saw last year. You've got to be more disciplined. But the defense also held Navy, forced Navy to punt more times than really Navy's used to punting, to be honest with you, just because of the number of possessions that they have. And so we need to see them be better. But I don't see Navy scoring a bunch of points on Notre Dame this year unless the offense just gives Navy a lot of opportunities or we see the worst game plan. The interesting part for me is going to be if Navy does get into the red zone, how is Notre Dame going to be better this year with their red zone defense? Now, good news is Navy wasn't very good in the red zone last year either. But obviously, forcing turnovers is going to be a big part of this. Anytime you get your hands on the football against Navy, that's a big plus. Not allowing the big plays, as you saw, Navy was not a real great big play offense. That's gains of 30 yards or more. But Notre Dame allowed them to have at least 2 last season that I can think of. Let me look at the box score real quick and see if they had more than those 2. But Dabo Fofana had a 50-yard gain, and they had a 34-yard gain throwing the football as well. And you can't allow those plays to happen in this game. You just can't allow it to happen. But as we all know, this is the matchup that matters. And I'm not going to try to do this every week where it's like run game versus run game and get into that cliche about, you got to run the ball and stop the run. But look, guys, when you're playing the triple option, that's kind of where it's going to be. And when you're playing a triple option team that actually is third in the nation last year in rush defense and has been in the top 10 in rushing yards allowed in 2 of the last 4 years under the current regime, and obviously Brian Newberry was the defensive coordinator for both of those. He's now the head coach. Then it's an important part of the matchup. But this is really where it comes down to for me is Navy's going to get their yards to a degree. They're going to, I think the Notre Dame in recent years, they held them to 166 in 2021, which is obviously a really good performance. In 2019, Navy ran for 281 in a game Notre Dame won by 32. In 2018, in a game Notre Dame won by 22, Navy got 292 yards. In 2017, Notre Dame won by 7, but held Navy to 17 points. They still had 277 yards. In 2015, when Notre Dame held Navy to 24 points, won by 17, they gave up 318 yards. You guys get the point, right? Even when Notre Dame has blown Navy out, they're going to get their yards. It's not so much the yards that I care about, although if you can keep them around where they were when Marcus Freeman was the defensive coordinator, which was 166 yards, then this game is a blowout. I mean, it will be. It'll be an absolute rout if Navy is only rushing for 166 yards. Look, anything can happen in football, right? But I'd be shocked if this game's not a blowout. If Navy, it looks anything like it did 2 years ago with Marcus Freeman. I'm curious to see how the run defense is going to look this year schematically. Last year was Al Golden's first year in college since 2015. It was his first year calling a defense since 2004. He hadn't seen an option. I mean, he coached in the NFL for several years. He hadn't seen an option offense in a while. And I thought Notre Dame's early plan was sound, was solid. It wasn't great, but it was good. And then the second thing that hurt Notre Dame last year, in my opinion, was you didn't have J.D. Bertrand. And if you go back the year before, J.D. was very good against the triple option the year before, had 9 tackles, 6 solos. And then, of course, you didn't have last season, you didn't have Kurt Hinish either, who had been great against the option the year before, had 10 tackles. You have a lot of guys that have seen the option now multiple times. That's going to help. Bateljo's seen it now multiple times. Riley's seen it multiple times. Nana's seen it multiple times. Howard Cross has seen it multiple times. You're going to have your linebacking core healthy as far as we know, and that's going to help. And then the other thing is last year, Notre Dame did not play Benjamin Morrison early. And I think because, he was a freshman and not the strongest guy in the world as a true freshman, they must have made the decision that they wanted to get, just the veteran players out there. And then when they finally brought him in, he was great. So I expect we'll see Benjamin Morrison to start this game at cornerback, and getting J.D. Bertrand back should help. They're going to be a little bigger up front, but they're going to be athletic. I think that's going to be an important part of this. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to you need to have a sound plan, and you need to have a plan that your players execute at a high level. What's that going to look like? It's a great question. I'm curious to see if Notre Dame is going to go at Navy with more of a 3 down this year. Are they going to go at them with more of a 4 down this year? Are they going to mix up their looks? 3 down sometimes, 4 down some other times. Ryan and I had this conversation yesterday, and I've said as an offensive guy, I want you to be in a 4 down from just a pure standpoint of my numbers count. But I also said this: the most dangerous that a team can be to the triple, in my opinion, is to be able to go at it with a 4 down that just kicks your butt up front. I think that's such an important part of it is, because what you can do is you have now 2 big guys up the middle that can play the dive. You've got defensive ends that can crash. And then what that can do, if you're running it right, is that can open up opportunities for your linebackers to run free. And then the other part is the linebackers are going to have to do a better job this year of getting off of, some of the blocks. And so we're going to see if Notre Dame can do that. The corners are going to have to play well too. And we'll dive into all that as well as we get into the matchup part. But this is going to be the part of the game where Notre Dame is going to have to thrive. If Notre Dame cannot dominate this matchup, then they're going to have a hard time winning this game. This is such an important part, and it's an important part every year against Navy. But here's the other aspect of this that I think is interesting. When you look at the Notre Dame run defense against the Navy rush offense, I think this is going to tell us a lot about the Notre Dame defensive line. We're going to learn a lot about this group, in my opinion, when we get into this matchup. And I'm going to talk about some individual players here in the next section, but I loved what I saw from the defensive line in fall camp. Marcus Freeman talked about how surprised he was about how well they played. And it wasn't just like a practice here, a practice there. Just every time we saw them in any kind of live action, they just really impressed me. It's an athletic group. It's a bigger group than it was last year across the board. But this is the first time we're going to see this group as currently constituted. Even though last year in the bowl game we got close to it, but you still had like Jason Adamiola or Justin Adamiola in the bowl game last year. You still had Chris Smith in the bowl game last year. So even then, it's still going to look a little bit different. But can the big guys up front handle the Navy guards who actually have some? Ryan and I were talking about this yesterday. They actually have a little bit of size to them. Their left guard, Ben Purvis, is 293. Their starting center, Mertezi, is 315. Their right guard, Joshua Pena, is 278. He's a bigger sized kid. The tackles always tend to be taller, longer, athletic guys because they're the ones that get up to the second level a lot. So you've got to be able to come off and play big boy football and keep them off your legs, but also get a push and just attack. And I want to see what kind of game plan Al Golden comes this season with, with his D line. Does he allow them to attack? A lot of coaches try to read everything out and outthink themselves. And I'm just telling you right now, the best way to stop the option is a disciplined but aggressive game plan. You can't just line up in the same play every other time. And by the way, we're going to have a video tonight talking about the option. I'm going to tell you all about it now because Ryan was able to get it done. But the special edition show that we're going to have, and I'm going to publish it tonight at 8:00. Ryan sat down this morning with Greer Martini, who was great against the option. And Ryan and Greer just talked about some of the things that Greer believes in from his time playing against the triple option that he feels gives you a chance to slow it down. The second part of the podcast will be just Greer talking about what's going on with him, the latest with him. He's the linebackers coach at Charlotte right now. But that was a great, great interview. So we're going to play that tonight. And so I'm not going to actually dive into, normally I do a sort of a Navy breakdown of the triple. I'm going to let Ryan and Greer handle that tonight. It was really well done. And I think you guys are going to enjoy that a lot. So I'm going to publish that on the podcast platform tonight at 8:00. Or the YouTube platform tonight, 8:00, and then tomorrow morning, so Thursday morning, I'm going to publish that on the podcast platform. But I think you guys are going to really enjoy that. But I just believe the best way to go at the triple is to attack it. You got to be disciplined, because if you're not disciplined, if you're aggressive but not disciplined, what will happen is you're going to have 10 tackles for loss in the game. But they're going to have a bunch of 12s and 15s and about 3 or 4 40 pluses. And that's going to be something to hurt you. So you've got to be aggressive, but you also have to be sound. And I think if they can kind of handle that, I think they'll be pretty good. So I'm looking forward to seeing that part of the matchup tonight. So that's sort of that stacking up. And we talk a lot about just the cliche of you have to be able to stop the run and run the football. And that's very true. And you never know fully about what a team is until you see them play, and you never know what a team is after just one game. But I do think this is going to give us a little bit more of a taste than we otherwise would in an opener, just because of how good Navy is at stopping the run and how difficult the triple option can be to defend. So I think that's going to be something that's going to tell us a lot about this football team. It really is. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do. It's going to be a lot of fun. So that's going to do it for this part. I'm going to do some matchup or some sort of guys that need to step up in the next part. Part 2 of today's episode is going to look at guys that need to step up. So we did the stacking up in the first part. This is the step up part. The step up part for me is guys that I think are important to success, and it varies week to week. And some weeks it's going to be this receiver, a different receiver the next week, a different lineman this week, those type of things. And I think those are all parts of it. Sorry, just busting somebody's chops in the chat right now. But and I was messing with you. But there was somebody that asked, "Isn't you have to be aggressive but have to be sound to apply to every team that we play?" And the answer is no. Not really. You're not always going to be that way. But I had a little other colorful comment for him that I was just messing with him because he's someone who's on the message board and been around for a while. So just want to make sure he knows I'm just teasing him a little bit. But the other part is obviously the scheme, and you talk about the scheme, and you have to be good in the run game, and these type of things. But I also think great football teams have players to step up in big moments, or players that say, "Hey, this matchup works great for me," or "Hey, this is not a great matchup for us," which means I got to really be on top of my game. And how you can thrive in those instances, and having players to step up and make money plays is obviously important. And each week, there's just going to be different players that I think are going to be key to being able to go out there and play your best football. And that's always what the objective is, right? What do you have to do to go out there and play your best football? And when you look at the Notre Dame offense this year, or this game, I think there's four guys. Well, really, it's five guys, but four sort of together that I'll get into that are really key. And number one is Sam Hartman. Now, I know the quarterback's always important, but the reason I'm starting with him in this game is because of the nature of what Navy does. Ryan had a really good breakdown today in sort of a matchup article that he did at Irish Breakdown, and he and I were talking about this last night as well, that Sam Hartman's important in this game, not just because he's the quarterback at Notre Dame, but also because of what Navy does. And that's where this matchup is going to be most important. Is Sam Hartman has got to be able to make the plays this year that Drew Pine could not make last year. And it's not always just throwing football. Sometimes it's checking. It's making the protection, make sure that the protections are set correctly. Saying, hey, we've got this play called, but we got to get out of this. Or, hey, I'm just going to pull it and throw this sucker, even though they maybe want me to do something else because we're going to run an RPO because of this look. But it also means when the opportunities are there to make the plays to put Navy away, you've got to make them. And that was really an issue with Drew Pine last year. And I thought Drew battled his tail off against Navy. I thought he battled his tail off against USC. And when you look at the numbers, you say, how can you really blame Drew for the offense last year? And my response is, like, I never blame one player for the offense struggling. But the quarterback is very important. And when you look at Drew last year, 17 of 21, 269 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, you're like, that's a pretty good performance. But he was also the quarterback of a team that failed to got, I think, 1 first down in the whole second half, 1 first down. You didn't play great when your offense only gets 1 first down in the second half. And the problem is there just were too many missed opportunities in the throwing game. And again, sometimes stats can lie to you because the stat doesn't tell you the time you took the sack when you should have thrown the ball. So it's not an incompletion or anything, interception or whatever. It's just you didn't get the ball out. So that's why just looking at the sack numbers or looking at the passing numbers can be a little bit misleading. And obviously Drew didn't make some of those throws. I mean, you go back and I'm going to actually find when that was, but there was a play in the third quarter where Notre Dame threw a pass to Michael Mayer, or tried to attempt a pass to Michael Mayer, that if Drew Pine hits him, basically the game is over. It was Navy had scored to make it 35-24. This was in the fourth quarter, excuse me. And Drew Pine drops back. He's got Michael Mayer on a wheel route, and if he's wide open, and if he hits him, it's a touchdown. It's 42-24 in the fourth quarter, and the game is over. And he missed him. You can't have that happen. You can't be in situations where your quarterback doesn't see a pressure coming and gets sacked because he doesn't account for the unblocked blitzer. And what that means is when I set a protection and I've got a 6-man protection, and if they bring 7, we can't block everybody. And so I, as a quarterback, have to account for who we can't block, meaning I have to throw off of him. I can't just let him sack me. Or if I know I only have 3 to this side and I've got my back going this way, so if they bring this player, I know we can't block him. I have to throw hot off him. That's something a quarterback is responsible for. So a quarterback has 2 responsibilities when it comes to pass pro. Number one is making sure that you set the protection correctly. And what that means is there's 2 things a quarterback can do to set the protection correctly. Number one is make sure you're in the right protection. There's different types of protection. You can have man protections. You can have slide protections. You can have play action protections, because sometimes you'll check to a play action protection, even though you're not really running a play action, because that's the way that you can block that look that they're showing you. It's more for the offensive line. And so you've got to make sure, are we sliding? Are we mic protecting? What is our protection concept here? The second part is you've got to make sure that the protection is set the correct way. So if I'm setting my slide, are we sliding left? Are we sliding right? I have to identify that and make sure we're sliding in the right direction. And then I know if I send my line to the left, I now know. So if I'm sliding to the left, my back is going to block inside out for linebackers and pressures to the right side. So I know if they bring the inside backer to my right and somebody off the edge, the back has to pick up the inside guy. I got the outside guy as quarterback. So I got to throw off him, or I have to step inside or do something to avoid that guy. But that's the guy we can't block. I got to throw off of him. If I slide the protection the wrong way and they've got four guys coming and we've only got, three blockers, then we're going to be in trouble because we also can't account for over here. So you've got to make sure that you're set it the correct way. If you've got to make sure that you're making your mic protection to the right direction, so the center knows how to communicate to the rest of the team. Those are the two aspects of it that are very important for a quarterback to be able to handle when it comes to protections. And then, of course, knowing who you can and can't block. Now, there's times where you don't block guys you're supposed to, and that's on the offensive line of the running backs. But when you're responsible for, hey, we're blocking these guys, and sometimes they're only bringing five, and you've got six blockers. But the way the protection is set, they're bringing four off of a side. You only have three. So it's not always just about bringing seven. You have to know either A, got to check out of that. B, here's my hot read or my read off of that, how I'm supposed to beat that guy. And those are things Sam Hartman has to thrive on in this game. And they're going to try to throw a lot at him. He's going to have to be accurate. He's going to have to be a good decision maker. But the big thing is when the opportunities are there, and they will be there, Notre Dame is going to get at least 4 or 5 big play opportunities in the pass game against Navy. He has to make those throws, in my opinion. He has to make those throws. The next two guys that are important in this matchup are two wide receivers for different reasons. One is Tobias Merriweather. And this is a big one because the way that Navy plays, the outside receivers we saw last with Braden Lindsey is going to get one-on-one opportunities. He's going to get space opportunities. Navy is not going to come into this game respecting Tobias Merriweather, nor should they. He has one career catch. If you're Navy and you're looking at Jaden Thomas, who caught 3 passes for 80 yards against us last year, he did that damage from the slot. Now their slot is Chris Tyree, who runs a 4-3. I've got Audric Estime. I've got Joe Walt. I've got Blake Fisher. I've got Zeke Corral, and I've got Sam Hartman. With all due respect to Tobias Merriweather's talent, that's the one guy that hasn't proven anything to me. So I'm going to make him beat me, is how I'm going to do it structure-wise. Can Tobias do it? It's going to be a big part of this game. This is a chance for him to have a little bit of a coming-out party. And I don't need him to catch like 8 balls for 140 yards. If he does, great. But I don't need that. I mean, really, if he only catches 4 passes, but they go for 80 yards, that's okay. I can live with that. A couple 8, 9, 10 yarders, but then a big play that helps soften up the defense. They're going to have one-on-one opportunities in this game. He's been going up against Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison all fall camp, and he's won some and he's lost some. Again, in this game, you're going to have to win those. That's going to be an important part of it. When you look at Navy's corners, their corners are 5'11", 197 and 6 foot 197. They're not big guys, but they're not small by any stretch, and they're strong kids. So Tobias is going to have to be physical in this game. He's going to have to be physical in the pass game, but also this matchup for Tobias also includes the run game. One of the one of the most underrated aspects of playing a triple option team and playing a team that's very aggressive the way that Navy is you're going to have to make plays in the perimeter run game on both sides of the ball. Your corners on defense have to play well, which I'll talk about in a minute. But on the other side, one of the things I talked about earlier is against this defense, you've got to get the ball outside in the run game. Well, if your field outside receiver is getting his butt kicked by the opposing secondary, then you're not going to be able to run the ball outside. The corners are just going to come up and knock him back, funnel everything back inside, and allow the safeties and linebackers to get to the football. It's a big part of it. So Tobias has to play well in both phases of the game. And if he plays well, I don't know that Navy has a chance to beat Notre Dame. Because I think Jaden's going to get his, and I'm going to talk about Chris Tyree in a minute, and the tight ends will catch some balls. I want to see the backs involved. But if Tobias Merriweather goes off in this game, Navy is going to really struggle to stop the Notre Dame offense. The other receiver that I think is going to be an important part of this game is Chris Tyree. And we saw it last year. And we saw it last year with Jaden Thomas. Jaden Thomas was the slot for Notre Dame in the game last year. And he was really good. First half, they didn't really get to him in the second half. He had 3 catches for 80 yards in the first half, had a touchdown, great catch in the end zone. There were some opportunities where he was open more, but the ball just didn't come his way. But the slot position is really intriguing in this game because if you're going to be an RPO offense, if you can catch Navy in a couple pressure situations where they're going to bring their 2 inside backers, there's some things you can do. Now, I don't necessarily love running like double slants against this because I always worry about you trying to catch a slant behind a blitzing linebacker and that safety robs and steps in front of it, or just drills your guy, knocks the ball up in the air, and then you pick it off. So those concern me a little bit, but there's some things they can do with bubble screens. There's some things they can do with seam routes. There's some things they can do more with crossers as opposed to slants, where you kind of get Chris Tyree running, and that allows him to. Because the reason I like a cross to beat a team that's really bringing their safeties aggressively down as opposed to a slant is twofold. Number one, if you run a cross, it's more of a free-flowing route, which allows him to kind of outrun it. You can time it a little differently, where a slant is kind of, he's got to hit that mark and you got to get the ball out. And if he's not there, you're going somewhere else. Where if they're bringing a double inside pressure like they did last year, if I can kind of step back a little bit, let Tyree clear those safeties on a crosser, then I can kind of get him the ball in space. Or if they're really getting aggressive, he can then climb over top of that backside safety. If I can get the ball, if I can keep the ball long enough, get him over there. So there's some things he can do in that regard. Some wheel routes, some out cuts. If they're going to bring their safety down, they blitzed that edge guy a lot last year. If you can catch him in that, maybe run a fade out and get the ball outside. They had it open a couple times and the ball got batted down. But there's going to be opportunities for Chris Tyree to go off. And I talked about this before. I think Chris Tyree can help you in the run game in this matchup as well. And part of my having Chris Tyree here also involves, I want to see them give the rest of their opponents something to think about with Chris Tyree in the slot. I would have like the full Chris Tyree package in this game. And the reason why is not necessarily because, Chris Tyree is going to be your best player or anything like that, but it's more of he can do so many different things that if he can rip off, let's just say hypothetically, Chris Tyree hits a wheel route for a big play. And let's say he then catches a crossing route and outruns a defense for a 25-yard gain. And then let's say he gets a little jet sweep that goes for 15 yards. And then let's just say on that play I mentioned earlier, you run that little stretch action, they crash hard, you end up reversing it to Chris Tyree, and he rips it off for 40, 50-yard gain like we saw Braden Lindsey do in the past. And like we saw Chris Tyree do in 2020 against Georgia Tech with I think he had like a 25-yard run. If you can start doing things like that, then now next NC State, Central Michigan, Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, they're all going to have to game plan for that and spend a little extra time with all the different things you can do, which then maybe gives you some opportunities to open up some other people around the offense. So, hey, if they're folks, man, we got to let Chris Tyree. And next thing you know, that safety's, he's got his eyes on number 2, and you run that little slant route or, little quick post of Chris Tyree, and that safety's like, oh, there's number 2, got to close on him. And then you stare at it as a quarterback, you look right at that route, and then guess what I got coming? I got a deep post over top of it. So, yeah, you can come down and jump on Chris Tyree because you saw us rip up Navy with it. But now I'm banging that post right over your head behind it because we've been able to establish that slot receiver. So I think that's part of it too. So it's Navy specific, but it's also about setting up opportunities down the road for the rest of your offense. And now other guys got to play well. Obviously, Audric Estime needs to play well. I'd love to see the backup running backs play well, and Jaden Thomas and other receivers may step up. But I think those 2 guys are the most important for me. And then the final offensive matchup to me is going to be very important. Is going to be the right side of the offensive line. They have to step up for me. And I mean, you got Joe Walt on the backside. We'll see what we get out of Pat Coogan. But to me, I want to see this right side of the line be dominant this year. Rocco Spindler was interviewed yesterday, and he talked about, getting to play beside his best friend. And, him and Blake obviously came to school together. They were in the same class. Actually, him, Joe Walt, and Pat Coogan and Blake Fisher were all in the same class for Notre Dame. But if Blake Fisher is who we hope he is, and Rocco Spindler is who we hope he is, then the right side of your offensive line is going to be big and physical. Notre Dame released an updated depth chart recently, or an updated roster that had Blake Fisher at 315 pounds, Rocco's at 314 pounds, Zeke Curl's at 306 pounds. You should be able to come out at some point in time and just say, hey, we're just going to beat you up. And I want to see Blake and Rocco establish themselves as dominant players in the run game. I do. I think Blake has a chance to be that. This is a great opportunity for Blake Fisher to announce himself, to say, hey, look, I was a young guy last year, redshirt freshman, learning my way. I'm here now. I'm arrived. And Joe Walt's not the only great tackle that we have in Notre Dame. I would love to see that. And if him and Rocco do that, then they will be able to get the run game going. And if they get the run game going, Navy has no chance. And that's why I think what Brian Newberry does is really smart, is make teams beat you with one part of their game. Take one part of their game completely out because of how you scheme and say, hey, we're going to make you beat us with other parts of your game. Reality is a lot of teams that they're going to play aren't good enough to beat them with only one part of their game. Notre Dame was barely good enough to beat them with one part of their game. I mean, when you look at Navy last year, they went 4-8, but they lost a game where they only give up 14 points. They lost a game where they only give up 13 points. They lost a game, and they lost 2 games where they only give up 20 points. Their defense kept them in plenty of games. And even some of the games where they gave up a lot of points, it wasn't really because of their defense. It was more about, in my opinion, their offense. And so that part of the game is going to have to get a lot better. I mean, if you can perform better in that regard, and here's like an example, why Houston is a team that blew Navy out last year. What happened? They gave up 180 rushing yards and 261 passing yards. They were balanced, and you had no chance to stop them. When they played UCF later in the year, they held UCF to only 84 rushing yards. UCF only passed for 230, and you beat them 17-14. I mean, that's really what they've decided to do, is if you're going to beat us, you're going to beat us one-dimensional. Memphis was able to do that. Memphis only ran for 91 yards and passed for 415 and won 37-13. But most teams couldn't do that. And that's what Navy's decided to do. Notre Dame needs to be one of those teams that can do that. They need to be able to run the football and establish the run and throw the football. And to me, Rocco Spindler and Blake Fisher are going to be a big part of that. And so I'm looking at them for this matchup. But honestly, part of it too is just wanting to see what they're made of. That's going to be a big part of this thing for me. Is I want to see what that right side of that line is made of. Is Blake taking a step? Is Rocco ready to shine? And if they are, it's going to be pretty good. And so I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. And I have a few guys here. And again, I'm cheating a little bit because, I did. It's usually going to stick to like 3 or 4 players, but sometimes it's guys at a position. The first one for me is the defensive tackles. I'm looking at Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Jason Onye, and Gabriel Rubio. All 4 of those guys, to me, I'm going to have my eyes on. They are going to be an immensely important part of this football game for several reasons. But I also am just curious to see, is what I saw in fall camp, are they really that good? Or is this more of a situation where the offensive line wasn't as good? And that's always the back of your mind fear in fall camp, is like, man, this one side of the ball was really good. And you say, boy, I'm excited to see what they're going to do. But then in the back of your mind, you just got that little voice saying, that's because the other side's just not that good. They're actually not that good. You don't really know until you get to games. I actually think they're going to be good. I watch them perform. I see the athleticism. I see the length. I see the quickness. I see the power. I say, boy, I think these guys are going to be really good. Now we're going to find out. And this is one of those games, as I mentioned earlier, Navy's interior offensive line is not small. Now, they're small compared to most teams that you play, but they're not small for an option team. They got a 315-pound center, 290-something pound left guard. That's decent size for an option team. And they play hard, and they do a lot of double teams. So when they run their veer, they do a lot of things where if you've got a 3 technique to that side, they're going to double team him as they work up to the next level. You've got to be physical, and you've got to be athletic, and you've got to be a gap sound. And the defensive tackles, to me, are the most important part of not letting a team rip off the long runs on the inside runs, whether it be the veer handoffs to the fullback, whether it's the dive look off the midline that they just hand off and he cuts it back, whether it's the quarterback ducks, any of those different things that they do, you're gonna have some success against a defensive tackle group, a defense, if the defensive tackles are getting chopped, are hitting wrong gaps, are not getting off blocks. But at the same time, if you dominate inside as a defensive tackle group, then the triple option is going to have a hard time going, because the minute you force the triple option to go laterally, they're done. Now, they want to go laterally, but they want to do it on their own terms. They don't want it to be the base. As Ryan and I talked about yesterday, and I've said this for years, first thing you do to stop the triple option, stop the fullback. Second thing you do to stop the triple option, stop the quarterback. You're not going to get beat with their super backs, unless it's a 13-10 game. You're just not. If they have to rely on their super backs to win the game, they're in trouble. That's just the reality of it. Doesn't mean their super backs can't make big plays, but they're making big plays off of the fact that you're having such a hard time stopping the fullback and the quarterback, or you're not being disciplined. So those are all aspects to me that are very important. And the defensive tackles are literally the first line of defense, and figuratively the first line of defense, because if they can dominate, then the triple is going to have a hard time going. It just is. You have to dominate in the trenches. You have to, and especially up the middle. And so I'm very much looking forward to seeing what that group does. The second part is JD Bertrand. No, one of the often overlooked parts of last year's games, there was no JD Bertrand. And I don't even mean that from like JD is like this Superman character that, he comes out against, Navy and he rips off the shirt and he's got the Superman thing underneath. I'm not saying that. But it hurt them last year in twofold, or really two areas, I should say. Number one is he practiced during the week. He was a game time decision, so he took some reps. He didn't practice a ton, but he took some reps, which meant he ended up taking reps from whoever was going to play, and he just couldn't get healthy in time for the game. And so now you're going to have a veteran player back who's faced the triple option, who had 9 tackles, including 6 solo tackles against Navy the year before, when Notre Dame held Navy to 6 points. So he's been part of a game plan against Navy that shut it down. We saw that in 2021. But also, he's your leader in the front seven. And when I mean leader, I don't mean captain. I mean he's your leader from the standpoint of he's the guy that gets everybody set. He's the guy that makes sure the 3 technique is lined up correctly, or the defensive tackles lined up correctly. Hey, you got to be in a 2-eye, or you got to be an inside shade of the guard, whether you want to call that a 1 or a 2-eye. People call it differently. Hey, you need to be in a 3. Hey, you need to be in a 4-eye. Whatever the case may be, you're the leader. You're to the defense what the quarterback is to the offense. It's up to me to make sure everybody knows where they're supposed to be. And you didn't have that last year. And you ended up putting a couple freshmen in there at times in that game last year, which I think factored in to some of the issues that Notre Dame had with being assignment correct. Is there were times it just didn't look like they were all on the same page. Well, when you have JD Bertrand in there, you're probably going to increase your odds that you're on the same page more and more and more. So it's not even just about if you believe JD Bertrand's a great player or not. It's not about that. Obviously, I think he's a good player. I think he's an important player, but more so it's about the leadership he's going to provide from a snap to snap, making sure everybody's lined up against a triple option and making sure everybody's on the same page. And then he's got to make plays. And look, your Mike linebacker has to be a guy against the triple option. And it doesn't always result in a bunch of tackles. Sometimes it can result in I'm blowing the lead blocker up, because Navy likes to do a lot where they take that wing and they fold him inside and have him lead block on linebackers. You got to blow that guy up right into the hole. And you may end up not making the tackle, but you blew that lead blocker up, or the tackle's trying to come at you to the next level, and you got to knock his butt back, because you're going to knock him right back into the running back's path. And he's going to bang the running back. And then next thing you know, you guys are rallying to the football. And you didn't get a tackle on that play, but you made that play as a linebacker. It's going to be a big part of it. And I think JD Bertrand is a guy that is going to give them a chance to take that run defense to another level from where it was last year. He's going to be a very important part of that. Xavier Watts is another one. If you can have a safety that's really impactful, that can fly downhill, can make a lot of plays, can blow up the pitch game, can play over the top when they want to run their post wheel kind of concepts or their wheel concepts or whatever they're going to do throwing the football. If your safeties can be impactful, you have a chance to be really good. And I have a feeling Xavier Watts is a guy that will be a weapon for Notre Dame against Navy. He's another guy that I think has to play well, but also he has to play smart. Don't take bad angles of the football. Don't take whether it's downhill or playing over the top. When you get chances to pick the ball off, make those plays. If Xavier Watts has a big game against Navy, Notre Dame's defense is probably going to have it means that they're probably having a good day. And then the last one's the corners. And some of y'all might kind of laugh at this one a little bit. corners against Navy, but I think the corners are a very important part of this game and a very underrated part of success against the triple option, because corners serve two very important roles. Number one is they are the edge of your defense against a triple. And if they are not performing well in setting the edge, you're going to have a hard time really stopping the triple. And then the other part is they're a very important piece to being able to limit the big plays in the pass game. And corners are in a very tough bind against the triple option because they have to be disciplined enough to handle the double fakes. They're going to run. They tried that little halfback pass last year. They're going to run stutter goes. They're going to run post wheels. They're going to do all these different types of things for Notre Dame, and you need to be able to handle those things. And when you're able to handle those things, you're going to be able to thrive, in my opinion, on the perimeter of your defense, and especially the run game part. Look, they're going to do a lot of things. We're going to try to cross block, send the safety or the outside receiver down to block the safety. The wing backs or the pulling line are going to kind of come out to try to take on the corners. You've got to fly up and make plays on them. You've got to come downhill. You've got to blow them up. You've got to do it deep enough to force an early cut. You've got to make sure you stay outside contained. You can't let yourself get ridden outside, because the more you get ridden outside, the easier it is for them to have more space to stretch your defense and then get inside of you. The corners have to play a very, very important role in the run game, but you then have to do that aggressively while also not getting beat over the top on any kind of double move. Because if you're doing the option right, there's going to be pass plays where I talked about those cross blocks, but those cross blocks are also going to look very similar, where they're going to have that outside guy kind of run towards the safety, attack that outside shoulder, safety goes down, and then boom, you sneak behind them. And then I'm coming out, and as a slot, a super back, I'm coming out like you think I'm going to block you on the perimeter, and then boom, I run right by you off a play action fake. And if you're not disciplined, if you're not reading your keys, you're not reading your tells as a corner, then it only takes them 2 times to get 80 yards in the pass game. And you just can't give up those big plays. So I think the corners have to thrive. And I'm more thinking the outside guys here, not so much the slot guys. Slot guys are important too. But I'm more looking at playing a base, like the 4 DB type of defense more this week. And in that, the corners have to play well. So when you look at the defense, those are areas where I think players have to really thrive if Notre Dame's going to have success in this game. And I think in most of those matchups, look, Sam Hartman and quarterback, Tobias, Tyree, the D tackles, JD Bertrand, Xavier Watts, corners. I'm confident that they can play at a very high level. It's just I need to see it. The one I have the biggest question about is Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler. And that question is not from the standpoint of I don't think they're capable of it. It's more so like all those other guys we talked about. Sam Hartman, I've seen play. I've seen Tobias Merriweather play. I've seen Chris Tyree play. I've seen all the D tackles play. I've seen JD Bertrand play. Xavier Watson, the corners play. Never seen Rocco Spindler play in college. I think he got a couple snaps against BC last year. So it's my question is more about the unknown of it, as opposed to not thinking Rocco's good enough. I think Rocco's plenty good enough. It's just the unknown aspect of it is why that's my big concern. But it's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be our first chance to really see who this Notre Dame football team is, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. And these matchups are going to be a big part of that. Let's get into the final part of today's show. And that is going to be the bellwether recruits on defense in 25. We talked about this earlier. These are not the 5 best players. These are not the 5 most important players. Some of them are in the best player conversation, right? But this is more about these are 5 bellwether recruits that how Notre Dame competes in these battles. Win some, the ones you lose, you made it really tough on the kid, that are going to tell us a lot about what kind of recruiting staff that Notre Dame has. Now, the 23 class was outstanding. I think that class says a lot about Marcus Freeman more than it does the defensive staff, outside of Mike Mickens, who's been there now for several years. The 23 class, as far as the good things we saw, defensive line recruiting, we've talked about some of the issues there. when it comes to evaluating Al Golden or Al Washington. Half the class was already in it when he got hired. Armel Mukam was primarily recruited by Chad Bowden. And so it really left you a bit of an unknown. You lost Keon Keeley. Then you come into the 24 class. You lose Justin Scott. There's a lot of angst about that, understandably so. But I really like the DN class. There's some projects in there, but there's a lot of talent. And Notre Dame is banking on that their evaluation for Sean Silviano is good. So it was a good bounce back year for Al Washington, but there's another level that coach needs to get to. And I think the 25 class is going to give us a chance to find that out a little bit. Same thing with the linebacker class. What's Max Bulla's impact going to be now that he's going to be more involved in recruiting? Can Chris O'Leary come out and say, hey, look, you were able to salvage the 24 safety class a little bit by getting, Bronte Johnson, but I don't know how much credit I want to give Chris O'Leary for that. I think he did a nice job, but, I need to see. I think he did a nice job with Kennedy Urlacher, but it was a good safety class, but you had a lot of misses. You fast forward to the 25 safety class. It is a loaded safety year, and Notre Dame is in on some really talented players. But they were in on some really talented players last year. Can he step it up and do a better job this year? So there's a lot of different ways I look at that to say it's going to tell us that the staff is stepping up in areas where they need to step up, but it's going to give us more evidence of whether the staff can or cannot go against the big boys. And that's going to be the key, because evaluation is always going to be a huge, huge piece for Notre Dame. Being able to find the Logan Thomases and the Cole Mullins and the Leonard Moores, who on the current roster are the Benjamin Morrisons, the Cam Harts, the JD Bertrands, the guys that weren't big time recruits that you found and you saw something in them and you helped turn them into big time players. Those are huge for Notre Dame, no question. But there also comes the piece that you've also got to be able to go out there and get the Kingston Viliama Asas. You got to go out there and get the CJ Carrs. You got to go out and get the Gearby Lamberts and the big time guys that have the higher floors. And that's what we still don't know about this staff as a whole, and especially a couple key positions. So there's 5 guys in this class that if Notre Dame is able to win most of these battles, at least half of them, right? Because it's 5. So if you have to, if you're over half, that's 3 out of 5. That's really good. And there's technically 6 players that I list, but one of them are just kind of more of a positional thing. And this is going to tell us a lot about the chops for the staff. And it's going to focus on a couple positions that need to improve. And then, of course, one big time player that I want to see how they're going to be able to do. So when you look at this staff, this offense, this defensive staff for me, and we're going to start up front and then work our way back. The first one for me is D-line. This is a big year for Al Washington, in my opinion. Again, nice bounce back here in 24 on the edge. Still have question marks about inside. You've got to go out this year and show that you can recruit big-time players. And there's a lot of different ways I could have gone with this. I thought about going with Jarquez Carter. I thought about going with a couple other different guys inside that are really good players. I thought about going with Bryce Davis. But the one that I'm going to go with first and foremost is Christopher Burgess. And the reason I say that is you still have to prove that you can secure your backyard. And you didn't do that in the 24 class. And we can talk about all the different reasons why, but the reality is they wanted Justin Scott and they didn't get him. Christopher Burgess is a kid that Notre Dame is very high on. They like him a lot. Whether he's a big end or does he grow into a 3 technique, that remains to be seen. But this is a kid that's got a lot of upside. He's a kid that's in your backyard, but he's also a kid that's getting looked at by everybody. And when you look at the offers that Christopher Burgess got this offseason, it's a really impressive offer list. I mean, he's got offers from Ohio State. He's got offers from Michigan, Wisconsin, and all the Midwestern teams. But this is a kid that also, I believe, also has offers from Alabama, I believe, right? Let me look at this. Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Tennessee, Ole Miss. He's got a very Auburn, Colorado, USC, Miami, Florida, Nebraska, Washington, Texas A&M. This kid has a huge offer list because everybody around the country sees that this kid has tons of potential. Notre Dame still has not shown on defense that it can put that gate around its backyard and win those battles. They just haven't done it. And so I need to see them be able to do that up front. And Christopher Burgess is a big part of that. Now, the good news is they've gotten him on campus multiple times. He seems to really like Notre Dame, but you're going against Ohio State. You're going against Michigan. You're going against Georgia. You're going against Alabama. You're going against Miami. This is not a given. in my opinion. This is not a situation where you're going to look at this one and say, "Oh yeah, he's in your backyard." Look, Simeon's not a Notre Dame feeder school. It's a public school. It's not a private school. This is not a kid that typically is from an area of Chicago that is as favorable to Notre Dame as like the Catholic League, for example, right? So this is one you're going to have to win. You're going to have to do well in this battle and win it. And if it does, that's going to tell us a little something about Washington, that he is taking that next step as a recruiter. But it also gets you a guy that's down the street. And I think it's very important to get highly ranked guys. And Christopher Burgess is a highly ranked guy. It's very important to get highly ranked players in your own backyard, because that means they're going to be on campus a lot. And I think that's a very, very important piece to this conversation. And so Christopher Burgess is where this conversation starts for me. When I look at the next position, again, I'm working my way back. It's linebacker. And there's two recruits to me that are going to be key here. And to me, it's like, get one of them. And if you can get at least one of them, it tells me something, because these are national recruits that otherwise should be guys that Notre Dame should do well with. The first one, I'm going to start out West Coast, and that's Noah McHale. This is a very talented football player that has been to Notre Dame. He said at the beginning of his recruitment that Notre Dame was his dream school. He has mentioned that before. Now, that doesn't mean Notre Dame is his leader. I don't believe they are. It doesn't mean that Notre Dame is going to land him just because he's his dream school. It just means that you've got at least an in there that allows you to get your foot in the door. Now it's about what you do next. But again, this is another kid that's got offers from all over the country. USC, obviously, Texas A&M, Alabama, Oklahoma, Michigan, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Oregon. He's got offers from all over the place. He's visited Bama. I believe he's also visited Georgia. I know he's visited Bama. I'm not as 100% sure on the Georgia visit, but he's a national recruit. This is a top 100 kid. This is a big time football player, in my opinion. I love this kid's film. I think he's an outstanding football player. And when you look at Noah McHale, inside linebacker, athletic, could maybe grow into a Viper. We'll see how his body fills out. High academic kid, athletic kid, has some affinity for Notre Dame. If you're going to be this recruiting staff that we think you are, these are battles you need to win consistently. Notre Dame just won one in a very big way in the 24 class, getting Kingston Asa, excuse me. And similar type of prospect, right? National recruit, big time player, but Kingston didn't have necessarily that early affinity for Notre Dame the way that Noah did. And you were able to get him, but you had to put a lot of resources into getting him. Your head coach was on it. Your defensive line coach was on it. You did have an advantage there because you had Al Washington. And we've talked about some of the things that Al Washington needs to do to continue getting better, landing top players on the defensive line. But you also can't ignore that he had a big role in getting Kingston Asa along with Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden. And look, and I don't really care how many resources you put into it. You've got to get it. And you got to get it done. And so Noah McHale is one of the two linebackers that are in that group for me. And I could put Anthony Sack in there. Again, this isn't a list of top recruits. These are more bellwether recruits that show me that this staff is really turning the corner. The second linebacker for me is Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. This is an intriguing one because I thought about not putting him on here. But I think it's important to put him on here because if you get him, a lot of people are going to just say, well, his brother went to Notre Dame, was an All-American, won the Butkus Award. Of course he's going to go to Notre Dame. Nope. If you get Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, it's because you recruited your butts off. This is not a brother situation where his brother went here, and so he's going to go here. Nathaniel told us he's never even been to Notre Dame. So never visited when his brother was at Notre Dame. Never was on campus when his brother was at Notre Dame. It's a very different situation. It's not like the Akwaras or the Adamiolas or some of the other brother situations. It's a very different situation. And this is a kid that's now at IMG. He's got offers from all over the country. He's considered by some, top 25 type of recruit. I think I'm actually going to look it up right now. I think one service has him like in the top 15 or 20 this year's class. Let me just look at, Rivals has him number 18. The lowest ranking he has is 88th. He's 32nd by 247 Sports, 65th by On3, and 88th by ESPN. Big time player. Every Southern school's after him. Athletic, talented, dynamic, all the things that you would expect of him. And he's bigger than his brother was. And so that's obviously a big part of it. But this is not a kid that's going to be easy to get. And right now, if I was predicting where he'd go, I would say I don't know where he's going to go, but it's not Notre Dame because the kid's he's never been on campus. So this is going to be a tough one, but this is exactly the kind of recruitment that really shows what your chops are. And that's that's ultimately why I threw him on this list, because the only way you get him is if your staff is dynamic. And that's why I have Nathaniel Owusu Boateng on the list. Rest of my list, secondary players. I'm going 2 safeties next. Now, again, there's other safeties in this class I like, but these are 2 guys to me that are going to tell us a lot about this Notre Dame staff. And the first one for me is a kid that I think is a really intriguing player and a guy that I'm very much looking forward to seeing if Notre Dame can kind of build on the success they had this summer when they got him on campus. That's Jadon Blair. This is a kid that I like a lot. Now, his ranking's a little all over the place right now. 247 has him as a 3-star, which is nuts. Rivals has him as a 3-star. ESPN has him ranked number 262 in the country. But On3 has him ranked number 26 in the country. I think he's in between ESPN and On3 as of right now. But I think his ceiling is incredibly high. He's a top 100 caliber player. I would just have more towards the back half of the top 100 just because he is still a bit raw. But Penn State's all over him. He's got a very impressive Atlantic Coast sort of presence. LSU's offered him. Florida State's offered him. Miami's offered him. A lot of those, again, Atlantic Coast, I guess LSU's kind of on the Gulf of Mexico, right? But a lot of those programs are after him. His offer list is only going to grow. He just got recently offered by LSU. I promise you that's not the last SEC team that's going to offer that kid. This is an intriguing kid because in a lot of ways, he is a Notre Dame kid. I think he's got good academics. He's a really, just you listen to him talk and you're just like, boy, this kid just understands what life is about for a young kid. And kids like that tend to have a proclivity to look at Notre Dame. They had him on campus this summer. They absolutely crushed it. He loved this visit, loves Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame put themselves in a great position, but this is probably one that's going to take a while. And he's going to get into some situations, or you're going to get into some situations if you're Notre Dame, where you're going to have to battle some really good programs for him. But he's also a kid that's in a very important area. And when I look at Jadon, I see a 6'3", 6'4", long, skinny, rangy kid. He's going to obviously draw Kyle Hamilton comparisons, which makes sense. But he's a guy that you understand those comparisons because he plays a similar style of play. He can play downhill. He can play over the top. He's rangy. He's smooth. He's fluid. Love that kid. And he's from a state that Notre Dame wants to have a lot of success in, North Carolina. And they're ramping up their North Carolina success in recent years. And I dig that. They got 3 kids from North Carolina in this year's class: Micah Gilbert, Jack Larson, and Bryce Young. You want to keep that going. And this kid is a really good player. There's another safety on the board who's a completely different type of player. He could play safety. He could play slot. I think he could even play some field corner. And that's Ivan Taylor. Ivan Taylor is a very interesting player. 2 services has him ranked as a top 50 player. Very big-time talent. Had a great summer season in 7-on-7s. Came to Notre Dame's camp. Looked great at the camp. Came back later. You've got a shot here, but there's a lot of work to be done. He's obviously Ike Taylor's kid. Ike Taylor played in the NFL. This is a kid that I think is going to have a fondness for Notre Dame, but he also understands that, look, yes, I like Notre Dame, but I also want to go to the NFL. I also want to be a guy that's going to play for championships and all those type of things as well, on top of a kid that wants to get a very good education. And those things are all important to him. But again, similar teams, right, folks? I'm going to say it again. Alabama offer, Michigan offer, USC offer, Tennessee, Florida, Ole Miss, Penn State. It's Miami. A lot of those same schools are on this kid. And it's going to be a battle. But this is another one of those recruitments where if you could get a kid like this from Florida, because unlike a lot of the other 2 kids they have from Florida, Justin Thurman and Davion Dixon, they're not native Floridians. They haven't lived in Florida all that long. You haven't had a lot of success with the native Floridians on the recruiting trail. Ike Taylor is that kind of player to me. Now, he hasn't lived his whole life there, but he's been there a while, and I believe his dad is from Florida as well. I could be wrong on that. Let me look that up here real quick. His dad's from Louisiana, and so again, Southern kid, very Southern kid, and now you're in a situation where you're trying to get his son, and his son is a talented player, and I'm looking forward to seeing if they're even going to have a chance here. Look, This is those kids where, look, guys, you need a gap closing class at safety. You absolutely need it. And if you can get Ivan Taylor and Jadon Blair and, an Ethan Long or something like that, that is without question, a gap closing class. I think Chris O'Leary has done a great job with these two kids. And the thing that encourages me is right now they're ahead of the game from where they were with safety in this 24 class, where they had to kind of play catch up with a lot of kids. They have gotten on top of these kids early. O'Leary has, Freeman has, Chad Bowden has, and that's a big thing. But if you can land these two kids, and not one of two, if you can land both of those kids, that tells me, okay, Chris O'Leary has figured this recruiting thing out. We know he can coach. We know his current players love playing for him, but this guy has not been able to turn that into great recruiting results. This is his opportunity to do so. And those two kids, to me, are exhibits A and B of telling us if Chris O'Leary has truly turned the corner as a recruiter. And if Chris O'Leary turns the corner as a recruiter, think about that. If he starts getting the top recruits at his position, along with what Mike Mickens has done, you start thinking about what the athleticism and talent is going to look like in the secondary of Notre Dame in future years. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Last guy that I want to talk about. This, to me, is arguably the biggest bellwether on the board for Notre Dame on the defensive side of the ball in the 25 class. And that's Dorian Brew. I absolutely love this kid's film. He is so talented. And he is going to be a guy that is, man, you watch him play. He is tall. He's physical. He's fast. He's athletic. He can play corner. He can play safety. He can play receiver. I don't really care where he plays. And I even right now just kind of call him a DB. But you beat Ohio State last year for a kid. Ohio State's pretty much kicked your butt for years outside of offensive linemen. You had a nice win over him this past year with Kingston Viliama Asa. That was a huge win for Notre Dame. But that was a kid from California that goes to a Catholic school. Now you're talking about a public school kid from the state of Ohio. Now, here's the thing about Dorian. He likes Notre Dame. There's no doubt. He's been to Notre Dame, I believe, multiple times. Right now, he's a kid that's has expressed an affinity for Notre Dame. He's from the western part of the state, which, should help a little bit, in my opinion. But you're talking about a kid, to me, that is just naturally an Ohio State kid in every way. I mean, look, Michigan, who's been in the playoff 2 years in a row, kicked Ohio State's butt the last 2 years, still got beat for the two best DBs in the state of Ohio, Aaron Scott and Bryce West. Still couldn't get them. That's a hard thing to do. Getting those Ohio athletes out of the state of Ohio that Ohio State wants is not an easy thing to do. But that's what you need to do to get to that next level. And when I look at whether it's Mike Mickens, whether it's Marcus Freeman, whether it's Chad Bowden, whether it's whoever that's going to be involved in this recruitment, this is exactly the kind of kid you need to start winning every now and then. Big-time player, versatile player, can play multiple positions, and has an affinity for your school as well as an affinity for Ohio State and some other programs. You have success with kids like that, then that tells me that you are now a big-time recruiting program, not just hey, you're selling the tradition of Notre Dame. You're great at evaluating players and finding the sleepers. Those are fine. I love those kids. But you've also got to go get the Dorian Brews. This is, to me, a top 25 football player. I mean, that's what I think he is. I think he's a top 25 caliber football player. And he's the kind of guy that is a difference maker. He is a gap closer, no question about it. But it's going to be hard. It's going to be very hard to get him. It's going to be very hard to get him out of the state of Ohio. And if they can do that, you start feeling like this is a staff that can really do some stuff. So you want to get him on campus. You want to get him on campus for the Ohio State game. Let him see your team up against their team. You need to stay on him. And it's going to be hard, and he's going to be crystal ball to Ohio State by some people probably at some point in time. That's just kind of how it goes with Ohio kids. But you got to battle, and this is the kind of kid you got to get, in my opinion. So Christopher Burgess, Ivan Taylor, Jadon Blair, Dorian Brew, and then one of the two linebackers, Noah McHale or Nathaniel Usu-Boateng are the one. Now, look, I'll say something about that linebacking core. Notre Dame can have a great linebacker class in 2025 and not get either one of those two guys. But it would be great. but it wouldn't necessarily prove the point that I want to see proven at that position, if that makes sense. Doesn't mean it's bad, just means it's different. And there would still leave some little bit of question for me about certain things. But it's such a great linebacker class, you can get that. But those are the two tougher battles for me of truly elite players that are going to tell us a lot about who Notre Dame is. We're going to get out of here. As I said before, there's no mailbag today, but we did have a super chat from Mike Sullivan. Thank you, Mike, very much. He said, "You guys rock. I apologize for my grammar on my mailbag. Talk to text while driving isn't always easy." That is very true, Mike. I have had some issues with that. That's why I just stopped using it. To be honest with you, it drives me nuts a little bit. But that's going to do it for today's Notre Dame midweek rundown. Remember, tonight at 8 o'clock, I'm going to have that video that Ryan did with Greer Martini breaking down the triple option and how to stop the triple option. That's going to go up tonight at 8 o'clock on the YouTube channel. That's going to come after IB Nation Sports Talk, with Sean Stiers and Vince D'Addario tonight are going to be on at 6 o'clock tonight. So you're going to want to check that out tonight. My guys are going to do another great show. I just know it, because we're all excited about the season. Tomorrow, Ryan and I are going to have our prediction show. So a reminder that our prediction show this year is going to be on Thursday, not Friday. And then Friday, we're going to have our mailbag show. So I'm very much excited about that as well. Countdown to kickoff this year will not be live, but we will publish that. They're going to record it Friday night, and we're going to publish it Saturday morning at 6 a.m. So we'll have that up on Saturday as well. And then, of course, after Notre Dame hopefully beats Navy, we'll have our post-game show. So I'm very much looking forward to that. So enjoy your stuff tonight and be ready tomorrow, because, of course, when we make our predictions, we want to hear your predictions as well on the Irish Breakdown podcast. So I thank you guys all. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. If you haven't done so, what are you waiting for, folks? Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I promise you, you're going to like what we got going on there. You just got to try it out. You're really going to enjoy it. And you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can sign up for the newsletter that sends you all of our free content every morning. You can definitely check that out as well. And, of course, shop our merch store. You can get polos like this and get a whole lot of cool stuff in there. Unfortunately, not this hat. This is a Notre Dame hat, so can't get this one in there. But anyway, have an awesome day, folks. Some of you I'll see on the message board. I'm going to go right to that now. I got to get back to that mailbag and keep answering some of y'all's questions that we got going on there. But it's going to be a fun week. We get to watch Notre Dame this weekend. We get to watch USC in action this weekend. There's actually a couple games looking forward to. There's some games next Thursday that we're going to be at Florida. Utah's next Thursday. Man, football's around. It's right here, folks. And I'm excited about it. I know you all are as well. And it's going to be a fun week. So 6 o'clock tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk. 8 o'clock, you're going to sit where I'm going to publish that video that Ryan did. And then I'll be back with you tomorrow, 1 p.m. for Notre Dame Keys to Victory and prediction for the Notre Dame Navy game. Have a great rest of your day, folks, and I'll see you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.